What if, instead of beginning your Pokemon journey in a small town with a professor ready to give you a starter in Pokedex, it began on a mysterious island, seemingly void of other human life? This is Pokemon Deserted, one of the 4 completed Pokemon fan games that I'll be showcasing in this video. Now, hold on a second. When I play a Pokemon game, I want to explore a big, beautiful region with a lot of stuff in it. Well, this island may not be as big as your average region, yet it's certainly very beautiful, and it does have a good amount of stuff in it. Though, as pretty as your surroundings are, the wild Pokemon lurking in the shadows are quite deadly, packing powerful stat boosts, with some even having the ability to rejuvenate their health, if not defeated quickly enough. You'll need to gather resources, craft items, and catch Pokemon of your own in order to survive this harsh wilderness. Only then can you discover just how vast and exciting this place is to explore. But this adventure isn't one where you just wander around aimlessly beating up every wild Pokemon you find, because not long into your trek through the jungle, will you come face to face with a group of rune maniacs trying to control the legendary Pokemon who inhabits the island. They already seem to possess the relics to do so, leaving you with no choice but to track them down and return said relics to their original guardians. The game as a whole is pretty fun. It's a nice spin on the Pokemon formula, and the Pokemon variety kept the gameplay loop interesting. That said, I do think it kind of suffers from a bit more backtracking than I felt was really necessary. You can acquire the means to craft and switch team members from wherever you are, yet the price of repels made running back and forth between the previous healing spot feel kind of tedious. Besides that, it's a pretty short and sweet game that shouldn't take you much longer than a few hours to complete. Alright, maybe you do want something longer. Actually, scratch that maybe. I'm sure most of you watching do want something of a similar length to an actual Pokemon game. So let me introduce you to a lovely little game called Pokemon Nightmare. I won't pull any punches when I say that this is your very average collect 8 gym badges, defeat evil team, and conquer the Pokemon League story. It is of course possible to still have an interesting narrative with said formula, but I don't think this game seriously attempts to do that. The plot kind of only serves a purpose of giving you a sense of direction, though I will admit the ending is quite rewarding, contrary to what I personally expected. Despite my somewhat negative introduction, there are still some reasons to suggest this game outside of a seemingly average story. The first of those reasons is a surprisingly enjoyable adventure. Again, not to sound condescending, I just didn't expect the region that's clearly a straight line to actually be fun to progress through. Most routes and towns are pretty small in design, yet they do look rather appealing, and I will compliment that very little time is wasted going from one biome to the next. Above that in the story though, is of course the gameplay elements. Taking place in a relatively small region, I was grateful that the game didn't bombard me with every Pokemon ever created. The deck simply contains about 300 of them, hand-picked from all 9 generations. Early game team building was a little rough, which thankfully is an issue that does solve itself pretty quickly, as the EXPL is handed to you before even reaching the first gym, and the actual variety of these Pokemon expands not long after. But it won't take you very long to notice that this game does have a handful of regional forms, which I'm not going to lie, I wasn't really drawn towards. They weren't badly designed, they just didn't pique my interest over the available canon Pokemon. Yet, there are only about 20 of them, so I can't say their presence really affected me in a positive or negative way. Although where Nightmare sort of caught me off guard was its difficulty level. Comparing it to the basic 8 gym fan games I've played, I certainly didn't expect that this one would require me to actually strategize for every important battle. It wasn't to an extent where I needed to build a new team for every gym leader. I think I used only about 9 rotating Pokemon through my run. There were just a lot of moments where I was punished for not thinking straight or making too many mistakes in a row. The boss battles were quite rewarding, while also not feeling like a brick wall if you didn't want to use Pokemon you don't like. In conclusion, I think Nightmare is a game you should avoid only if you desire an engaging story. Other than that though, I highly suggest it. You won't have a difficult time building a team of Pokemon you like, and with about 11 hours of gameplay, it's not a game that'll drag on for an eternity either. The next game is one that I feel has gone way too unnoticed than I think it deserved. Sure, there was a decent amount of coverage from your usual content creators on release, yet after that, almost complete silence. Which doesn't really make sense to me because Pokemon Bazaar is actually quite fun. Like the previous project, I am quite used to these 8-gym fan games providing me with very similar stories. And while I won't lie that this one holds a majority of the tropes we're used to, it does take a surprising number of weird turns. Like, I really didn't expect to end up in a weird purple dimension 3 minutes after starting the game. The plot isn't one that's going to leave you with a ton to think about. The characters are definitely more goofy than they are serious. I just think it's overall a pretty fun read. The place I really need to compliment Bazaar is the region. Taking a glance at the map, I already knew I was going to have a good time, but my god, is it paced really well. In between each town, you have a really nice amount of content to complete that doesn't feel like a burden if you choose to ignore it. Like, the optional content isn't going to reward you to an extreme extent, yet it also doesn't feel like a waste of time because of how entertaining the process is, and that's mostly thanks to just how well designed these maps actually are. Mandatory or not, each area in the game has some sort of look or feel to it that didn't seem like it was ripped from another portion of the map. Traveling to the other end of the region will actually feel like you've made significant progress through your journey. But I apologize once again for going on a ramble about how interesting the region and story are while ignoring what really holds these games together. The core gameplay of Bazaar is, well, it's alright. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, there's not too much to the gameplay loop that plays significantly different from many other Pokemon fan games. You do have a handful of regional forms, though in 2026, that is a pretty common feature. There are also Fakeamon starters, and before anyone who doesn't like Fakeamon clicks off the video in uninterest, let me say that I firmly believe the variety of canon Pokemon provided in the early game will allow you to just box your starter with ease. I know it's a bit of a setback, yet with the extremely early EXPL reducing the tedium of picking up new team members, it's not something I think is worth abandoning the game over. Bazaar is all around just a good game. It has a somewhat entertaining story, a polished adventure experience, and a gameplay loop that, unless you need every fight to feel like an extreme challenge, should keep you engaged. Reaching this point in the video, I really wouldn't blame you for thinking, okay, come on, a fan game with very little story, a fan game with a basic story, and another with a sort of entertaining plot that you might enjoy. So how about this? How about a game with an actual focus on story? And not just any story, one so intriguing that it made me remember how good it felt to have an actually interesting and unique narrative in a Pokemon fan project. This is Pokemon Concealed, and it seems to have gone unnoticed by many for a very long time, which I can't say really surprises me. The biggest flaw of this game is easily how poorly promoted it is, with there literally being one gameplay screenshot between the two websites it's hosted on. But I digress. Pokemon Concealed is told from the perspective of a young girl named O'Neil, who at first looks to lead a somewhat ordinary life, returning to school and learning about Pokemon through various exercises. Very quickly, however, you realize that something is off. Underneath the seemingly peaceful tone of the town you reside in lies a very unsettling feeling. And I'm going to stop there with the story preview. But why? Even in the other plot-heavy games, I usually don't hesitate to summarize a decent extent of the introduction. What's different here? From my experience playing, I think Concealed will be enjoyed a lot more without any prior knowledge of its core plot points. What I will dive into, though, is its gameplay. Concealed takes place in a pretty small region that does feel like it's progressed through quite quickly. I want to say that the 4 out of 6 towns it has are traversed barely even a quarter of the way into the game, and a majority of the routes I traveled through felt extremely straightforward. Not really like I was walking in a straight line for a majority of the journey, there just wasn't really much to get sidetracked by in the trek from point A to point B. Though, considering this game's short development cycle, it's definitely more of a nitpick and not something I think a lot of people will care about. Yet, with a quickly paced adventure, the level curve will follow suit. You are offered the EXPL and a pretty generous variety of Pokemon quite early, both of which I highly suggest you take advantage of and battle every single trainer in your path. The game is only about 7 hours long, so in order to get you to the higher levels as quickly as possible, those of enemy trainers will jump extremely swiftly. Outside of that, I don't think the game was particularly difficult, so if you aren't a fan of story-focused games, you probably won't enjoy this. But if you are, then I highly suggest it. And that's just about going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed, and be sure to subscribe for more Pokemon fan games and ROM hacks. Thank you to my channel members for their continuous support, and have a nice rest of your day.